Are we having fun? Are we learning? Are we finding this productive? Awesome. So we are going to be doing something very interesting now before we end for today. And what we are going to be doing is called open spaces, right? The idea of open spaces is a self-organizing event. So the idea of open spaces is a self-organizing event, and the idea is that we believe that everybody came here today looking to learn something. Now, in the highlight of all of our speakers, right, I believe that all of us learn so much. But peradventure, there is something in DevOps or in SRE that you want to learn more about, or it's a controversial topic. I think someone asked something about DevOps and SRE, right? Those kind of topics, those are the topics that we talk about in open spaces. So the idea is bring up a topic and everybody share their ideas and their knowledge and their experiences about it. It's no moderation, it's not serious. It's just for us to learn more from each other. Basically, learning more outside of what our speakers have presented, right? So get ready your questions. We are going to be having our speakers here. They are going to be joining us. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So they're going to be joining us, as more experienced people. But that doesn't mean everybody else can also answer. So if someone brings up a topic and you peradventure have more experience, you have knowledge, or you have ideas, or probably you also want to have like a follow-up questions to what that person asks, feel free to take the mic. So this session is for every one of us. Every one of us should be participating. And we have a couple of rules when it comes to open spaces. The first is whoever comes is the right people. So that means that everybody here, you are the right people. Don't think you are less experienced or you are more experienced. Everybody here is the right people. Whatever happens, happens. If we end up talking about politics, whatever happens, happens, right? I mean, of course not. But whatever happens, happens. Whenever it starts, it's the right time. You see that we are just starting close to the end of the event, right? So whenever it starts, it's the right time. And finally, when it's over, it's over. So we don't have a time limit, but of course, so the idea is that until we are all satisfied with a particular topics, right? We've talked about it to our satisfaction. That is when we are done, right? But of course, we have to put some sort of like limit on it. So are we all good on this? Are we all clear? Are we all clear? The response is not given. Are we all clear? All right, so this session is going to be starting. We want it to be as educative as possible. Whatever thing or whatever questions you've had about the SRE, DevOps, about any topic, about observability, about security, about containerization, CI/CD, even if it's Web3, it's totally open, right? So I'll be handing over the mic to Victor now, and then we can get started. Thank you, everyone.
So I think I would want to start from the last two guys that we jumped for Marcelo and Uzziah's session, so you can ask your question.
All right, thank you. My question goes to Marcelo and Uzziah. In an organization, who is primarily responsible for driving this SLO culture? Who's the primary
responsible? That's a good question. Like I didn't find a specific role as being like the recommended designated person for driving this in any of the literature I came across. It's, again, a product of starting the conversation, getting the feeling of, who has a knack for the thing, where the person is in the organization. Maybe if there's only one or two people with this kind of skills and with that kind of drive in a 200-person organization, it might be the case that instead of driving SLO adoption and SLO definitions, that you drive SLO awareness and try to, propagate that mindset to other people until you have enough people across teams that you can share the burden with, or that work can be shared with. from Dapper Labs' experience, it used to be that the initial drive was owned and carried out by SRE. Now we're starting to see more people from the engineering teams take that on and take that responsibility and talk within the team about SLOs and about error budgets and involve SRE where their knowledge and their experience starts hitting the ceiling. Yuzi?
I think it's worth stressing the last part of what Marcelo said. You want to get to a point where other people besides SRE or your dedicated DevOps team start taking charge of SLOs and like managing and advocating for it. Once you get to that point, you know that you've built a culture. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's one more person from here.
Thank you. My question is to Marcelo. So regarding SLO metrics, so is it only based on uptime and request time, or there's more metrics that is used for measuring SLO? And also, you mentioned there are sites that are being used for SLO. So can you also mention few that you use?
Yeah, so what you want to build your SLOs on isn't just uptime or availability metrics, right? You want to build them on top of metrics that describe a user journey. So if for example, the example that I used, which was the ability to buy something on your site, if that requires a request going from a browser into your load balancer, into an internal service, then into a service mesh, into 5 databases and a caching layer, and another external, vendor dependency to complete the purchase, there isn't any one single metric within that user journey that defines what your SLO should be. It should be a combination of everything. And you can, in theory, like take a measure, use a metric that measures something the closest to your user as possible. For example, a request to the make payment endpoint came in through Nginx, and then you create an SLO based on that metric. But more often than not, you'll need to create SLIs that cover more than just one specific service and like one specific metric. It needs to be a combination of metrics that reflect the user journey, not just one isolated thing. Those make for better SLIs that will give you more meaningful SLOs.
Thank you very much. Is that all?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcelo. So if you have your questions written down, okay, let's start from that guy. You've written it already, right? So just read it as you wrote it. You wrote the story here now.
It's not a story.
Okay. Okay.
All right, thank you. My question is, I don't know who to direct it to, but let me just read it as it is. It concerns cloud adoption. Okay, there's a lot of skepticism about adopting cloud in, let me say, in Nigeria. So I want to know how safe it is and how secure it is to warehouse corporate data outside the shores of this country.
Did you get the question?
Yeah, I think I got it. Okay, if I understand you clearly, you want to know what are the policies around moving data out of the country. So, for instance, I actually work with a financial technology, so I understand the aspects you're coming from. Talking about the CBN policies around data that have to be within the country and what needs to be outside. I would say the first approach you should do is to identify what are these data, right? And the services that are involved. What are your core services? Let's say, for instance, your CI/CD pipeline, for instance, has nothing to do with your transaction, you can migrate that to the cloud. But when you talk about databases houses individual data, information, and you might have some regulatory concerns with moving it out. So you can keep your databases within the shell because of the policy. But for services like your CI/CD, you can take anywhere, and nobody is going to ask you, why is your CI/CD outside the country? So I don't know if that helps you to now to answer your question and how you can actually identify data that are policy inclined and data that are not policy inclined.
Thank you very much, Ogechi. We should clap.
Okay, so in addition to what she has said, with respect to Nigeria and storage of data, currently there is no strict policy that says you must keep your data in the country. There is a recommendation that you should have it in Nigeria. I know you have the NDPR that tries to mirror what the GDPR does, but at this point, there's no enforcement on housing your data in Nigeria. So with respect to whether it's safe to have your database in the cloud, it's safe. Almost all the database service providers have policies that mandate that if something happens to even a single byte of your data, you can sue them. So most of them are safe with that regards. Then as far as we don't have policies limiting you, I think you can go ahead to do that for now.
Let's clap now. Clap if you are clapping.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So let me just add that. Okay. So from security perspective, so there are some data that you can actually put on the cloud, and there are some, but you know, Nigeria, we usually have something related to infrastructures or private public cloud over here. But as I can see, things has been coming up. I see maybe like one private cloud provider here in Lekki or something. So we start having some things now. So I know in future things will change. So and the best way is for you to have your data here in Nigeria to be stored. So that's the best way. Yeah.
I will echo what others have said and just give you one example. Let's say, I don't think we do much of nuclear stuff here, right? But if you have a system like the electric grid, all the data that deals with that, if you have nuclear reactors, all the data that deals with that, I don't care how many nines you have in your security SLO, keep it within the country. So, but if you have something else, like maybe even cell phone, even banking to an extent, there are encryption services like encryption at rest and in transit. You can keep it in the cloud. So it's left for the customer. Determine how screwed you are if you get this thing like messed with. And if it's really bad, then keep it within the country. Otherwise, it's fine to keep it in the cloud.
And there's a question here. Oh, sorry. Okay. And some other thing you need to check as well is the regulatory bodies, right? Let's say you're regulated by CBN. You want to check your compliance, the compliance of the cloud provider with that of your regulatory body, say CBN. You want to check what compliances does CBN require of your data, and you want to be sure that it's covered by that cloud provider before you move your data to that cloud provider. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you
All right, so one more thing. So I think one of the reasons I couldn't even explain much better, so one of the reasons, or one of the things I actually said you should store your data here. So I think there's sometimes, problems, international relations issues, just like maybe like Russia, So that's one of the reasons I actually advise, okay, you can keep your data. So what in case AWS or US decide to sanction Nigeria? So it means all your data you can't actually access them. So I hope you guys will understand exactly where I'm coming from. So that's one of the reasons I said, okay, in future, we can have our data here. So I think these things have started changing now. So that's the reason I actually give that.
Thank you very much. Guys, let's keep it down. Let's keep it down. Let's keep it down. Thank you. So there's a question here for Andrew. How would someone implement or improve observability in an enterprise environment?
In an enterprise environment, ooh, fun. Yeah, the enterprise is sort of the forever white whale of DevOps. If you have a legacy tech stack or you have sort of like systems and processes that have been in there forever, it can be extraordinarily difficult to change things, especially sort of where it's a cultural change. So I think I'll lean sort of on what Marcelo and Uzziah talked about, a little bit what I talked about, where it's, if you don't have a champion for change in your organization, if you don't have someone that both has the mandate, the buy-in, the understanding of why it's important and what to do about it, you're going to be stuck. Especially in enterprises that believe very strongly in hierarchy, you're stuck. You can do grassroots change in the organization. If the engineers believe in something strong enough, you can kind of sort of like mount things up. So I'm not terribly experienced with bringing about big change enterprise, but the few things I've seen work is either you get the ear of a VP, an executive, someone that runs a project that they care deeply about, where basically the axe falls on their neck if something goes wrong, and you say, hey, we can help you make things safer. We can help you not get in trouble with the board when things go wrong, and then suddenly they're all ears. And then you can kind of roll the culture you want, to do things you want, or you have to do the grassroots movement, get a bunch of engineers on board, basically show up and say, this is too good not to do, and we all believe in this. And then if your enterprise is good, they'll say, okay, sure, that makes sense. If your enterprise is crappy, they'll shoot you down. Unfortunately, enterprise politics are not really my area of specialty, but I have seen it work, I have seen it happen, so it is possible. Anyone work more enterprise? Let's talk.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Please, let's clap for our speakers, please. We have a question here.
Hi everyone. The focus has been on infrastructure, making deployments and application work smoothly, so that it gives the user the best of what they can feel. Are there, so between development team and the user, right? That's where the DevOps lies, which means that it provides support for the engineering team and also serve the users perfectly. So are there things that that needs to be provided, right? Because I'm a QA engineer, so I try to look at the fact that what is the role of QA in DevOps or DevOps as a QA? So in terms of when you are deploying, are there requirements you get from the developers, the engineers, that okay, it's certified that this has already been confirmed, that we can deploy to production successfully, so you can have a better platform while you deploy what is not correct, what's not going to serve the user perfectly. So that's my question.
Let's see, hang on, before you do the microphone, let's see if I understand. That your question is sort of, how do you ensure sort of in an organization with dev and ops and security that everyone's sort of aligned, that like everything is working, that you're sure, like whose role is it to make sure that things are signed off at the right point, and whose role is it to like make sure things are done well, sort of thing? That's more, okay, so I mean, in the security world, there's a push to get them into the party as well and call the whole thing DevSecOps. Because sort of the problem that you're describing there is exactly the problem that DevOps is trying to solve, right? Security team feels like they're at arm's length from the process. They feel like they're a gate at the very end before deployment. And they're going, well, we have no say in this until the very end. That's sort of annoying. The whole thing, and again, sort of my whole shtick is that, you know, I want to see all the teams involved, all the teams that are stakeholders in the product, involved in the product as much as possible through the whole thing. It really shouldn't, if you have the question of kind of like, hey, we want to release this, whose job is it to tell us whether or not this is safe to release? It's likely that at that point, your process has kind of already failed you. If it's sort of a question in your mind, then it's sort of difficult to figure out. The big enterprises like Amazon, it's always the product team's decision to push something to prod, and they have rules within the product team that says, okay, you must consult security, you must consult reliability, like here's your checklist to launch. And that's a really effective way of getting things done. Everyone knows exactly what the process is, everyone knows exactly who to talk to when. If you're a smaller organization or sort of a more like agile organization, or just one that's arranged a little more loosely like Dapper is, it's more a, hey, let's make sure that all the teams that were involved sit down and discuss this while we're building it, and if something is about to go to production, someone puts their hand up and say, well, I had no say in this, that's a failing of the overall system. We go find that thing and go, okay, security didn't get a word in, how do we get them into the process earlier? How do we have them involved in the design phase? How do we get it so that when it's about to launch, everyone's already happy and there's no question? So you can kind of do it highly structured, loosely structured, as long as you communicate well, as long as your organization decides like this is what we want to do and why, and this is the goals we're hitting, then you iterate and decide what works best for you.
Okay, to add more context to what he said, after you've decided on who is to play a particular role and at what point they are to play that role, another thing is to get those roles into the process. So getting those roles or those persons into the process is bringing in their work into that process. So you have your entire CI/CD pipelines. You want to bring in each person to play a role in that process. So you have like a QA engineer, and after the developer pushes their work to a repository, sometimes the QA engineer just gets to have their test cases and all. You want to ensure that those test cases get to pass. So you probably promote the build, or you have the build in probably your CI pipeline, and then you promote it to probably your dev or test environment. You want to ensure that those test cases pass. So you could have like a gate or a pre-gate or so where those cases run against your test environment. So you have the QA ensuring that those tests get to pass. And if they don't pass, they are not promoted to the next environment. And you have like your project owner or project manager ensuring that the QA confirms that all these things have passed before it's promoted to another environment. And then you have like a security engineer getting to have vulnerability tests as well pass for your UAT environment or whatever environment before you even get to the point where it's tested or it's promoted to your production environment. So that's another way as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So this session, we have just 7 minutes more for this particular session.
Okay, all right. So I think one of the last things when you look at your CI/CD implementations, right? So that's the thing about DevOps, right? It's for you just to automate the process once the dev teams actually commit to the repository. So you actually write pipelines that take care of everything. So one of the things you can just look at, okay, from your CI, from your deployment script, right? Or from your deployment pipeline, okay? So you can actually look at how you are going to set it up, right? You can have your unit testing, QA testing, whatever. As they commit, the pipeline triggers, right? It needs to push. So you can just say, okay, you already have, it's going to be stage by stages, right? That's for your build pipeline, right? So for this build, you are going to have your QA testing, whatever testing, unit testing, and so on over there. Then the next thing, before it's actually pushed over there, then you can also have maybe like your security testing as well. That's going to do automated security testing of the new security code. So there are lots of open source platforms and paid platforms like SonarQube. I think it's one of the most popular one, right? So that's where you can also have a user access, and also you can also give credentials or access credentials to the QA teams that can actually log in and also see what exactly are actually the new bugs that's been found, right? And then that's where you actually have what? From the CI/CD, you have continuous integration, continuous delivery, or what? Continuous what? What? Deployment. So what's the difference? One has to be automated and the other one has to be what? Manual, right? So to deployment to the production, after hybrid has been done, so maybe they can just approve from there. So instead of being pushed directly to the production, so you can just trigger it manually. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm actually concerned. This is not really a technical question, but it has to do with our role as DevOps engineers. So we know our work is often characterized by very long hours. Like, for instance, I was on the call yesterday till 10 p.m. And when I thought about coming here today, I almost came with my work laptop. So I'm actually concerned. Like, how do you manage your work-life balance? Can I go on a date with my girlfriend without going with my work laptop?
Okay. So, so, and then fortunately, at that time you are not around. They say, okay, you can go on. So then the CI/CD process, maybe something just failed, right? They can't deploy, they can't push, nothing. There's a bug. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not gonna complain about my work-life balance in front of my director, so. But it's great, Andrew. It's perfect. You're such a good boss. Thank you. But yeah, I've worked in companies where it was crazy, like, working 12, 14, 16-hour days like that. As the one person that knew, like, that one company I worked for once didn't even, the concept of DevOps was like alien to everyone in the organization. It kind of materialized on me because I was curious enough to want to play with AWS, but there wasn't a culture, and a lot of that fell on me to do what you just described, being like kind of on call 24/7, like working until 10, 11 at night. But it's kind of okay to do that for a while if there's a bigger goal in sight, and that's not going to be your life forever. If that's been months and months on end, then yeah, either push for some change in the organization or push for a change of organizations. I don't know.
Yeah, there's sort of two things in my mind. The one is like, are you pushing, and is your work-life balance falling apart because you're trying to deliver features and you're trying to like build new things, or is your work life falling apart because you're the firefighter? If your life is falling apart because you're pushing hard for features or you're pushing hard to build things and hit deadlines, that's sort of like a company product culture problem, right? It's like if you're the only person being burned to a crisp trying to push for deadlines, you probably aren't working with enough of the team, or more accurately, the rest of the team isn't working with you, right? Like, it shouldn't be one person's job to get things finished, it's the team's job to get things finished. And so if the whole team is feeling burned out and the company still pushes you, yeah, push for the change of company. If you're the firefighter and you're being kept up 24/7, 365, like your life is a mess because the pager keeps going off, this is exactly what the error budgets are supposed to cover, right? If the error budget is spent, and if your pager is going off continuously, you will spend that error budget. When the error budget is spent, you're supposed to basically put the brakes on feature work and say, okay, we have to focus on this reliability problem because like our users are not happy, this is not something we can withstand. And so if your product teams and your sort of leadership is bought into the idea that once the error budget is depleted, that's a problem and it's going to start costing us money, then you can convince them to pour money into the fixes and getting your life back on track at the same time, basically.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Okay, so just to add to what they've said, the first thing will be, are you the only support guy in the team? So if you are the only support guy in the team, then it's a different discussion altogether. Because, I don't know, you can't leave the job for something, because nobody knows your job, right? So that's a cultural problem with the organization. They need to get somebody to sit with you and that can do what you can do, that can relieve you. Because there's what they call the boss factor. What happens if something happens to you when you're coming to work? So they need to have that in place also. Then talking about, if you're not the only one and it's a team and you're always firefighting on production or on test environment or whatever. So I like working with data. So what I would advise you do is try to take a step back, identify what are these things that they are always calling you out for. If the issues are repeating, that means you need to look for a root cause, do a root cause analysis, and get a permanent fix to those issues. So that you don't always have to go. They're always calling you that build is failing, because a pipeline is failing in your build pipeline. You need to know why are they failing. So you fix it, and believe me, you'll get your life back.
Thank you very much, Ogechi. I think we have one last question here for Andrew. So the question is, I work in a company where the organization culture makes it difficult to apply DevOps principles. What are some of the tips on how to make my organization adopt best practices without being unnecessarily stubborn?
Without being unnecessarily stubborn. This is hard for me because I am unnecessarily stubborn. So the DevOps culture at any company comes from a couple points, right? If you have the kind of company where your culture very much comes from the top, you have a cult of personality and like how they run the organization is how the organization behaves, you kind of have to focus your attention there. But for most companies that are larger than 20 to 100 people, the culture is out of the control of the people at the top, and the culture is what you make of it, right? DevOps is fundamentally a partnership between the developers and the operations teams. If your developers are the cultural problem and they don't want to do DevOps, it's probably because they're getting the easy end of the stick, and the ops team is the team on call that's dying 24/7, and they don't want anything to do with that. Assuming that they're not the cultural problem, you can do most of the DevOps work and most of the DevOps culture just between the two of you. You are the two most important teams in that partnership. Anything that you agree between yourselves, the principles you establish between yourselves and how you sort of build your work is up to you to do. And if you start getting pushback from the top, that's where sort of like the literature of DevOps and, hey, this is how much the delivery improves, this is how much reliability improves, this is how much more money we can make per quarter because we don't spend our time fighting fires and we spend our time building features instead. Like the literature behind DevOps will convince business people, and you, the cultural linchpin of it, you and the dev team can sort of make your journey for yourselves most of the way. Anyone else have experience?
All right. So I just want to ask, do we have maybe like any company over here that actually, implement their own DevOps? So for me, I just think maybe like it's a single role for a person. We are all here. I mean, as a DevOps engineer, right? You are the one to handle that, right? So instead of maybe like having to deal with the developers, if your own is just for developers to comment the code, right? And then you handle others. So instead of maybe like just having developers teams, you guys come in, that's the culture. But now DevOps is not a role. So I think lots of hirings now is just maybe like, okay, we are looking for a DevOps engineer that actually understands maybe like whatever technology stacks they are using, Java, Spring Boot. So you already know what you are going to use. You are going to use Maven. You are going to use which one again? For compiling Java. I hope you guys don't understand exactly what I'm trying to say. So that's one of the reasons, so they understand, or they need someone who actually understand that as well. So that's it for me.
I think the most important thing is to make the company understand why this culture is important. So I've worked in a few companies where it was the developers that were deploying their code, pushing and all. When you join such companies, what happens is, as a DevOps engineer, the first few months there is usually very stressful. First is you have a lot of stuff that weren't done right. You spend a couple of your time trying to get them right. You start trying to enforce some standards, and you realize you have a ton of projects that weren't following these standards. And you'll find out that you'll have times where a lot of downtimes would occur because sometimes you don't even have documentations around this stuff. So something is breaking here and you're wondering why it is breaking here. You're assuming some standards were followed, but they were not followed and all. So first, make the company understand why they need to imbibe this culture. The costs, right, how much they are losing, because one is without this culture, they will spend more time trying to get a particular product to market. They also spend a lot of time trying to debug an issue or troubleshoot an issue when it occurs. That also translates to cost in terms of money for the company. So first try to make them see why, and then try to make them see how this can be imbibed in the company. And then I think gradually they'll start getting to understand why they need to involve it.
And just the last thing, so I realized I sort of skipped one of the points I was saying. If the problem with your culture is that the engineers don't want to change because they're enjoying their current life not being on call very much, you can make a very appealing case to management that, well, we didn't write this code, and it takes us 7 to 8 times as long to solve problems with this code when things go wrong than if the engineers were on call. Hey, let's put these engineers on call and they can help us. And then suddenly the engineers are very motivated to adopt DevOps principles and sort of be involved in helping the reliability.
Okay, I think that's the last answer.
Yeah, so I think also making it easy. So when you're talking about changing the culture of an organization, and then Promise mentioned that you might have many applications or many pipelines that were configured before you joined, and you're wondering, okay, how do I start standardizing all of this. I think the best thing is to make it easy for the people that are going to be making those changes. So if you're going to make the changes automatically, if you're going to create scripts that make it easy for them, like that's the best way. Because the only pushback is when people see that they have to put so much effort into standardization and making and maybe fixing deployments and stuff like that. So when they see that they have to put too much effort, they usually back out. So it's to make it easy for them, and basically the job will get done, hopefully.
Thank you. Clap now. So thank you very much, guys. I think that would be all. You can